Ruthless cop, humiliates and arrest black FBI agent. He is hit with karma when he found out. In a bustling suburb of Atlanta, where the gleaming skyscrapers overshadow the quiet neighborhoods, an unsuspecting confrontation is about to erupt, one that will shake an entire community to its core. A hardened police officer, fueled by hidden prejudices, crosses paths with a brilliant yet unassuming black female FBI agent. Their fateful encounter will expose the raw nerve of racism, spark whispers of betrayal in law enforcement corridors, and lead to a remarkable twist of destiny no one sees coming. Before the dust settles, reputations and beliefs will be shattered, and the ultimate price for injustice will be paid in full. Officer Mitchell Dunn had spent the better part of 2 decades patrolling the neighborhoods of Atlanta. His father had worn the badge before him, and while Mitchell inherited a sense of duty, he also inherited certain biases that had lurked in his family for generations. To his friends and superiors at the Atlanta Police Department, or APD, Mitchell was a dependable street cop, the kind who always volunteered for the toughest assignments. But behind that reputation and under the surface, he held a quiet anger, one stoked by personal failures and tragedies he blamed on the changing world around him. That late summer morning, the sun cast a warm, golden glow on the city. Families ran errands, children were back in school, and the day held a sense of normalcy that often precedes upheaval. Mitchell took a long drag of stale coffee from a paper cup while he manned a routine speed trap along Peachtree Street. He watched the cars zip by, hoping to fill his daily quota of traffic stops. Yet his eyes were restless. He felt an itching in the back of his mind, an insatiable hunger to prove himself as more than just a traffic cop. He glanced at the clock on the dashboard and noted that his shift had been uneventful. He thought about his father, now retired and living out in a small town near Macon. His father often remarked how much simpler policing had been in the old days when certain people knew their place. Mitchell rarely questioned these sentiments, nodding quietly in agreement, even if he sometimes wondered whether times had truly become so complicated or whether it was his father, and perhaps himself, who'd failed to grow with them. A short call crackled over the police radio, announcing a minor theft nearby. Mitchell's partner, Officer Brad Nelson, responded that they'd check it out. Mitchell started the engine and guided the squad car onto the main road. As they drove, he gazed at the towering Bank of America Plaza that stood as a monolith on the horizon, a testament to Atlanta's rapid growth. The symbol of a new era, diverse, bustling, and unapologetically forward-looking, sometimes made him feel left behind. Brad Nelson fiddled with the radio dial, scanning for their assigned frequency. "Looks like a quick stop," he remarked. "A convenience store on the corner of Pine and West Peachtree. Suspects described as tall, wearing a black hoodie, took some packs of cigarettes and fled on foot." Brad was new to the force, idealistic, and full of energy. He believed wholeheartedly in community policing and even volunteered in local after-school programs. Mitchell found his partner's optimism almost irritating. In Mitchell's view, policing was about maintaining order, drawing a hard line where society's rules began and ended. Nuance and empathy came second, if at all. They arrived at the convenience store, an unassuming brick building near a row of small shops. The owner, an elderly man with thick glasses, looked relieved to see them. Security footage showed the suspect haphazardly stuffing cartons of cigarettes into his sweatshirt before bolting. Mitchell sighed, recognizing that petty crime was the bulk of his daily routine these days. They walked outside, scanning the sidewalks. No sign of the suspect. As they questioned a few bystanders, Mitchell's impatience rose. This might be a wild goose chase. He checked his watch, muttering under his breath about wasted time. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he noticed a tall woman across the street. She wore a neat suit, had a calm, self-assured posture, and was glancing at her phone. Mitchell didn't know why, but something about her composure both intrigued and irked him. She wasn't the hooded suspect, clearly, but in his mind she was out of place. dark skin, nicely tailored attire. He felt a pang of suspicion based on nothing more than appearance. "Hey, Brad," Mitchell muttered, nodding in the woman's direction. "You see that lady? She looks suspicious. Who stands around on this corner at this hour, dressed like that?" Brad peered over and shrugged. "She might just be waiting for a ride or an Uber." Mitchell stared, jaw tensing. "Yeah, or she might be a lookout for the shoplifter," he said, letting his own prejudice slip through. "Let's check it out." As they walked across the street, the woman raised her eyes from her phone. She was indeed tall, with features that suggested confidence. She wore a navy blazer, black slacks, and sensible black heels, an outfit that blended professionalism with practicality. Her name was Special Agent Tasha Johnson of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Atlanta Field Office. She had recently wrapped up a high-level meeting regarding a human trafficking case. After that intense session, all she wanted was a moment of fresh air and a simple coffee. She had just texted her partner at the bureau to pick her up when she noticed the police officers approaching. She recognized them as APD officers from their uniforms, but their stares were far from friendly. She sensed the tension. It was a feeling all too familiar to her. Even as an FBI agent, she was not immune to being singled out or profiled based on her race. Officer Nelson opened the conversation with a polite greeting. "Ma'am, everything all right this morning?" Tasha nodded. "Yes, officer. Just waiting on my ride." Mitchell stood a step behind Brad, eyes hardened. He loomed over Tasha, trying to exert an unspoken pressure. "Why here?" he asked brusquely, as if waiting in a public space was a criminal offense. Tasha raised an eyebrow. "It's close to my office, and I'm just grabbing a ride. Is there an issue?" Brad cleared his throat, noticing Mitchell's tone. "We're investigating a theft from the store behind us. The suspect ran this way." Tasha nodded. "I'm sorry to hear that. I haven't seen anyone matching that description." She maintained a courteous tone, but inside, a small alarm was going off. She recognized the signs: the squared shoulders, the suspicious glare, the direct insinuation. She had been through similar encounters before, though never quite this blatant, especially not in her professional capacity. However, her experience as an FBI agent had taught her to tread carefully, keep calm, and de-escalate whenever possible. Mitchell took another step closer, overshadowing Brad. "Would you mind showing us some identification?" he demanded. Tasha blinked. "Officer, I'm not sure that's necessary. I haven't done anything wrong. But if you insist." She reached into her blazer to retrieve her credentials, but Mitchell's hands shot toward his holster, eyes widening. "Slowly!" he barked, as though she were about to pull a weapon. Tasha froze, but her heart pounded. The tension sparked in the air. Brad touched Mitchell's arm, trying to calm him. "Mitchell, relax, man." Tasha kept her hands visible and moved slowly, carefully, retrieving a small leather badge holder. Mitchell's posture eased, but only marginally. He peered at the badge, expecting something ordinary, but his eyes flickered over the golden letters, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Her photo stared back at him, verifying her identity. Immediately, Brad's expression shifted to one of respect and mild embarrassment. Mitchell's face tightened as he processed the new information. "Special Agent Johnson, huh?" Mitchell said through clenched teeth, as though the words tasted bitter. "What business does the FBI have in this neighborhood today?" Tasha slid her badge back into her blazer. "I'm working a federal case. That's all I can say, and I'd appreciate it if you could direct any further questions through the appropriate channels." Brad apologized, stepping aside. "We appreciate your time, Agent Johnson. Sorry for the inconvenience." Tasha gave him a tight nod, feeling the weight of Mitchell's glare. She'd encountered men like him before, men who refused to let go of a preconceived notion even when the facts slapped them in the face. But for now, with the tension still hanging in the air, Tasha decided it was best to walk away. She turned on her heel and left the officers behind, uneasy about how such a mundane moment could stir such suspicion. Brad tugged at Mitchell's sleeve. "Let's drop it, Mitch. She's FBI. She's not our suspect." Mitchell didn't respond immediately, his gaze trailing after Tasha. Something deep inside him bristled at the notion of a black woman wielding authority. It wasn't just about race or gender or professional envy. It was all of those things combined, swirling into a toxic brew of resentment. He stuffed his hands in his pockets, finally breaking his silence. "All right, let's get back to the car." They walked away, but a seed of bitterness had been planted in Mitchell's mind, one that would soon sprout into something ugly and destructive. The stage was set for a confrontation neither Officer Dunn nor Special Agent Tasha Johnson could fully anticipate, and as the bustling city of Atlanta carried on around them, neither could see the storm that was about to break. Tasha Johnson arrived at the Atlanta FBI field office, still feeling the residual tension from her encounter with the APD officers. She tried to shake it off, reminding herself that not every officer harbored ill intentions. Besides, she had more pressing matters to handle. The building's atrium was alive with the hum of conversations, footsteps on polished floors, and the faint whiff of coffee from the corner cafe frequented by agents and staff alike. She pressed the elevator button to the 5th floor, taking a moment to gather her thoughts. Tasha's current assignment involved investigating a multi-state human trafficking ring, a case that had spanned months of painstaking work. Within the bureau, she was highly respected. Her colleagues knew her as relentless and meticulous, always prepared to push boundaries to protect victims and ensure justice was served. Stepping into the elevator, Tasha brushed a stray lock of her braided hair behind her ear. She could still visualize Officer Dunn's suspicious glare, as though she were nothing more than a threat. Over the years, she had encountered similar stares from people who underestimated her abilities, sometimes from perpetrators, sometimes from fellow law enforcement officers who refused to accept that a black woman could be just as competent, if not more so, than they were. The elevator doors opened, and she moved into a corridor lined with the typical grey carpeting, bland white walls, and locked doors leading to offices and briefing rooms. She made her way to her desk, where a colleague, Special Agent Marcus Whitfield, was waiting. "Hey, Tasha," Marcus said, leaning over the low partition that separated their workstations. "Heard you went out to get some air. Everything okay?" Tasha put her phone on her desk and gave a half-smile. "You know how it is. Just needed a breather after that morning meeting, but I ran into a bit of an attitude from some APD officers." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Something I should report?" She shook her head. "Not this time. It was more annoyance than anything else. I showed my credentials, and it ended there." Marcus sighed. "I wish we could say that's the last time it'll happen, but we know better." They exchanged a knowing look. In their line of work, friction between local departments and federal agencies wasn't unusual, but Tasha suspected the friction with Officer Dunn ran deeper than standard inter-agency rivalry. Before she could dwell further on the morning's events, her phone buzzed with a text from her direct supervisor. She had to attend an impromptu briefing in the main conference room. Tasha nodded at Marcus, grabbed her notepad, and hurried to the meeting. Meanwhile, across town, Officer Mitchell Dunn sat in his cruiser, feeling restless. The minor theft call had been a dead end, and frustration gnawed at him. He couldn't shake the thought of Tasha Johnson, FBI, self-assured, unapologetic. He recalled how she'd met his gaze, challenging him without uttering a single disrespectful word. It was that quiet conviction that dug under his skin. Brad Nelson drove through the congested streets, occasionally glancing at Mitchell. "You good, man? You seem tense." Mitchell shrugged. "Yeah, just thinking about that FBI agent. Something about her." Brad didn't hide his concern. "What about her?" She showed her credentials. "Case closed." "Maybe," Mitchell said flatly. "But if you ask me, she's up to something. Hanging around in that area for no good reason." Brad sighed. "She said she was waiting for a ride, Mitch. And she's FBI. Why would she be a suspect in a petty theft?" Mitchell drummed his fingers on the armrest. He refused to articulate the toxic swirl of resentment inside him, so he settled on something more vague. "I've been at this job a long time, Brad. My gut rarely lies. There's something about her I don't trust. Brad said nothing, his eyes fixed on the road. He respected Mitchell's experience, but felt uneasy about the direction of his thoughts. Still, he wasn't senior enough to confront Mitchell directly, so he stayed silent. Back in the FBI field office, Tasha found herself in a small conference room with 3 other agents, each assigned to a portion of the human trafficking investigation. Photographs and documents splayed across a long table, victims, suspects, known affiliates, and possible safe houses. They were connecting dots that spanned several states. Agent in charge Evelyn Parker stepped into the room, her stern features set in determination. "Good morning, everyone. We received intel from the U.S. Attorney's Office that a significant exchange is about to go down tonight in a warehouse near the outskirts of Atlanta. We need to coordinate with local law enforcement, but details are sensitive." Tasha listened intently as Agent Parker explained the plan. Coordinate with a specialized APD task force to provide backup, secure the perimeter, and potentially intercept the traffickers. Tasha was assigned as the lead contact with local police, meaning she'd need to liaise closely with them to ensure everything went smoothly. Evelyn Parker continued, "We have identified a potential ringleader who might appear at the exchange. This is critical. If we can nab him, we can effectively decapitate the entire operation. We need everyone on their A-game tonight." Tasha scanned the file. The location was near an industrial park, a maze of warehouses and loading docks. It wasn't unusual for criminals to exploit such areas for clandestine deals. She recognized the stakes. If they botched the operation, traffickers would slip away and the victims would vanish deeper into a brutal underworld. After the briefing, Tasha and Marcus regrouped at her desk. "I'll call APD's specialized task force right now," Tasha said, picking up the phone. "We need them to mobilize plainclothes officers and a SWAT unit on standby." Marcus leaned in. "Try to get someone you trust over there. We can't risk a leak or any unexpected friction." Tasha nodded. She dialed the number for the APD Special Investigations Unit and arranged a meeting for later that afternoon. As she set down the phone, her mind drifted back to the unpleasant exchange with Officer Dunn. She hoped she wouldn't have to cross paths with him during tonight's operation. Special Agent Tasha Johnson arrived with her team at a discreet location not far from the designated warehouse. A set of unmarked black SUVs housed her fellow agents, while APD's Special Investigations Unit was positioned in adjacent vehicles. The plan was laid out. Tasha's team would move in on foot, gather intel, and signal the go code once they confirmed the presence of the traffickers and any potential victims. The air around them felt electric. Tasha spoke into her earpiece. "Marcus, you have eyes on the south entrance." His voice crackled back, "Affirmative. No movement yet." "Stay sharp," she replied, scanning the area with a pair of night vision binoculars. Several cargo trucks lined up near the warehouse entrance, and she could see silhouettes moving about, some checking crates, others standing guard. Her heart pounded. This was exactly the moment she and her team had prepared for. One misstep, and the traffickers could vanish into the night. Inside one of the APD vehicles, Mitchell Dunn was not officially part of the Special Investigations Unit. But when he caught wind of the operation, he pulled strings with a friend in dispatch to be assigned as backup. His partner, Brad Nelson, had been dragged along reluctantly, uncertain why Mitchell insisted on being part of a bust that clearly required specialized units. Dunn's presence, however, was no accident. Part of him felt compelled to show that the FBI wasn't the only power player in the city. He wanted to prove himself, perhaps to confirm a sense of superiority he believed was threatened by agents like Tasha. Mitchell sat in the back seat, scanning the feed from a dash-mounted camera. "So these feds think they can just swoop in and handle everything?" he grumbled, voice dripping with contempt. Brad sighed. "This is a joint operation, Mitch. We're working together. It's not a competition." But Mitchell barely heard him. He fiddled with his sidearm, a nervous habit he'd developed over years on the job. Leaning forward, he spoke to the officer in the driver's seat. "What's the latest from command?" Feds are waiting to confirm the suspect's arrival, then we move in for the takedown, the driver replied, his tone neutral. Let's just see how this plays out, Mitchell said, tension coiling in his voice. Outside, Tasha crouched behind a stack of wooden pallets near the warehouse's side entrance, her FBI windbreaker blending into the shadows. She murmured into her headset, "Visual confirmation on at least 5 armed suspects. No sign of the ringleader yet." Agent Marcus responded, "Copy. Another set of headlights just pulled up. Might be our big fish." Tasha watched a sleek black SUV roll to a stop behind the warehouse, headlights cutting through the gloom. The driver stepped out, sporting a tailored suit that seemed out of place in the grim surroundings. A second figure emerged, tall and imposing, scanning the perimeter with the confidence of someone who believed they were untouchable. Tasha's intel identified this man as Hector Salazar, the suspected linchpin of the trafficking ring. Her pulse quickened. This was it. She signaled her team. "Eyes on Salazar. Stand by for the breach order." Time seemed to slow. Tasha quietly relayed the final instructions to each agent. Confirm weapon readiness, set perimeter coverage, and prepare to move on her command. The next few minutes would determine the success or failure of an investigation spanning months. Then, a sudden movement caught her eye at the far end of the lot. Blue and red flashes of light. A police cruiser had turned into the warehouse driveway. Panic prickled across Tasha's skin. That wasn't part of the plan. She spoke sharply into her mic. "Who authorized the cruiser with lights on? They're going to spook the suspects." No one on the FBI side claimed it. Tasha's heart sank. If the traffickers were alerted, they'd bolt or turn violent. She scrambled into action, waving her team forward. "We have to go now. Move, move, move!" The industrial park bust turned into a public relations nightmare by sunrise. News outlets clamored for details, and the central question loomed. How had a multi-agency sting gone so off the rails, allowing the prime suspect to escape? Rumors of inter-agency conflict swirled, with speculation that the FBI and APD were pointing fingers at each other. Within hours, Special Agent Tasha Johnson was called into a meeting with her supervisor, Agent-in-Charge Evelyn Parker. The crisp morning light filtered through the blinds in Parker's corner office, the tension palpable in the small space. Evelyn Parker wasted no time. "Tasha, sit. Tell me exactly what happened last night." Tasha took a seat, shoulders rigid. She recounted how they had everything in place until a rogue patrol car showed up with flashing lights, triggering a firefight. "Salazar saw the lights and made a run for it," Tasha said, hands balled into fists. "Then, when I went inside to pursue him, Officer Dunn attacked me and slapped me in cuffs." The memory still made her blood boil. Parker's face darkened. "I've already been in contact with APD's higher-ups. They were unaware Officer Dunn was even present. His presence was unsanctioned. We have formal grounds for a complaint if you choose to file one." Tasha hesitated. She disliked airing dirty laundry in public, especially between agencies, but this was beyond a turf war. A line had been crossed that directly impacted her integrity and safety. "I do want to file a complaint," she said firmly. "He obstructed a federal operation and assaulted a federal agent. His actions let Salazar slip away." Parker nodded gravely. "I support that decision. We can't let this go unaddressed." She paused, her tone softening. "Are you all right, physically?" Tasha flexed her shoulder. The bruise from Dunn's grip still throbbed. "Nothing I can't handle," she said, trying to sound composed, though her pride was deeply wounded. Meanwhile, at the APD precinct, Mitchell Dunn sat in the office of Captain Laura Sinclair, a stern woman known for her no-nonsense approach. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Dunn slouched in his chair, arms crossed, a stubborn set to his jaw. "You had no jurisdiction last night," Captain Sinclair said, her voice dangerously calm. "No clearance. You single-handedly compromised a federal sting." Mitchell's temper flared. "The FBI has no business bossing us around, especially that agent. She was interfering." Captain Sinclair slammed a hand on the desk, making Dunn jump. "Are you even listening to yourself? You attacked a federal agent, cuffed her, and let a major suspect escape. Do you understand how bad this looks for the department?" Mitchell winced. He was used to being chewed out, but this had a different weight to it. He tried to deflect. "She disrespected my authority. Besides, she refused my orders." Sinclair let out a harsh laugh. "Your authority? Over an FBI special agent in the middle of her operation?" She rubbed her temples. "The FBI is filing a formal complaint. Internal Affairs is investigating. I've got the deputy chief breathing down my neck. You've crossed the line, Mitchell." His face tightened. "I was doing my job." "You were feeding your ego," Sinclair shot back. "Effective immediately. You're on desk duty until further notice. Hand over your badge and gun." A cold wave of dread washed over him. The badge had defined him his entire adult life, and the gun was his sense of power. Reluctantly, he removed both from his belt and placed them on the desk. Captain Sinclair's eyes bore into him with a mix of anger and disappointment. "Let's hope this is temporary, Officer Dunn, but if the investigation confirms what I've heard, you might be looking at disciplinary action or worse." He left the office, face hot with shame. A few of his colleagues shot him sympathetic glances, but many looked away, clearly disapproving. Brad Nelson caught up with him near the locker room. "Man, what happened?" "They're saying you attacked an FBI agent." Mitchell glowered. "She was in the way." Brad shook his head sadly. "Mitchell, I was there. She was doing her job. You crossed the line. Why can't you admit it?" His words stung, but Mitchell refused to back down. Instead, he silently gathered his things, ignoring Brad's lingering stare. Unclipping the badge from his shirt felt like peeling away a piece of his identity. He tried to convince himself it was a temporary glitch, that his father would have stood by his actions, that real policing required a tough stance. Yet he couldn't shake the sense of foreboding that he'd set in motion a chain of events he could no longer control. Elsewhere, Tasha tried to focus on the real issue. Salazar was still at large, and every passing hour gave him time to cover his tracks. She assembled a small team, combing through every lead. Marcus approached her, laptop in hand. "We found something," he said, excitement in his voice. "Salazar was spotted on camera near Hartsfield-Jackson Airport. He might try to flee the city." Tasha immediately got on the phone with TSA and airport security, relaying Salazar's description. She also reached out to APD's Special Investigations Unit, coordinating on more local leads. Despite the fiasco with Dunn, Tasha refused to let it poison her cooperation with the good officers who actually wanted to help. Amid these efforts, Tasha received a call from the APD's Internal Affairs Division, requesting a formal statement regarding Mitchell Dunn. She agreed to meet the following morning, determined to see it through. Professionally, she had no choice but to speak the truth. Personally, she felt a moral obligation to address the blatant racism and abuse of power. Later that evening, her mind drifted as she stared at her reflection in a mirror in one of the field office's quieter corridors. She felt a knot of conflicting emotions: anger at Dunn's behavior, shame at having been so publicly manhandled, and frustration that their real target had slipped away. Yet beneath it all lay a stubborn resolve. She reminded herself that the fight for justice was never neat or simple. It demanded grit and resilience. In his modest apartment that same night, Mitchell Dunn paced the living room floor. The lights were dim, and the television news ran a report about last night's failed sting. The anchor mentioned an internal investigation into a police officer's misconduct against an FBI agent. Mitchell turned the TV off, rage boiling within him. He felt betrayed by his department, misunderstood by everyone, and singled out by the Bureau. It never crossed his mind that he was the architect of his own downfall. With his badge and gun confiscated, he was suspended in limbo, powerless and humiliated. Yet a small, twisted part of him still believed he was right. He even entertained wild thoughts. Maybe this was all part of a larger conspiracy. Maybe Tasha Johnson was out to ruin him from the start. When people cling to bigotry, they often weave intricate justifications to avoid facing the truth about themselves. As the night wore on, both Tasha and Mitchell felt the weight of their decisions pressing on them. Tasha for choosing to take a stand, Mitchell for refusing to acknowledge his fault. The city of Atlanta buzzed around them, a mosaic of lives, each carrying on oblivious to the personal storm they were weathering. But storms have a way of colliding, merging their destructive forces until the damage becomes undeniable. In the days to come, lines would be drawn, loyalties tested, and truths laid bare. Neither Tasha Johnson nor Mitchell Dunn could foresee just how severe the reckoning would be. But it was coming all the same, a freight train of consequences hurtling toward them both, fueled by pride, prejudice, and a thirst for justice that would not be denied. The next morning came far too quickly for both Tasha and Mitchell. While Tasha rose before dawn to finalize her statement and gather evidence of Mitchell's misconduct, Mitchell awoke to a gnawing dread, knowing he had to meet with internal affairs. The once proud officer now found himself reduced to a suspect in the eyes of his own department. Inside a subdued conference room at the APD headquarters, a long rectangular table took center stage. A few uniformed officers stood off to the side, whispering among themselves. At one end sat Lieutenant Regina Hall, a seasoned investigator from Internal Affairs, her posture poised, eyes calm but piercing. Her gaze flicked between Mitchell, fidgeting in an uncomfortable wooden chair, and Tasha, seated across from him in her dark suit, FBI credentials clipped to her lapel. Hall began, her tone balanced. "Officer Dunn, Special Agent Johnson, thank you for coming. This inquiry is to establish the facts of the incident during last night's sting operation." Mitchell said nothing, his jaw clenched tight. Tasha met Hall's eyes and nodded. "I understand." Hall turned her attention to Tasha first. "Agent Johnson, can you recount the events from your perspective?" Hall's gaze flicked between them. "I see." She exhaled slowly. "Officer Dunn, you're aware that assaulting a federal agent is a serious offense, and false arrest or unlawful detainment is also a grave matter." Mitchell tried to hold on to his pride. "I was doing my duty to protect the scene." Hall leaned forward. "Were you protecting the scene or asserting your will, Officer Dunn? Because the official logs show the local and federal teams had carefully coordinated. We can't find any mention of your involvement, nor can anyone verify your reason for being there." He said nothing, lips pressed into a thin line. Tasha could see his anger simmering, but the evidence against him was overwhelming. Hall made a few final notes before sitting back. "Thank you both for your statements. Officer Dunn, you are still on administrative leave. We will be making our recommendations to the Chief and the District Attorney's Office. Agent Johnson, if we need more information, we'll reach out." Mitchell's eyes flickered with alarm at the mention of the District Attorney, but he said nothing. He rose abruptly from his chair, resisting the urge to slam his fists on the table, and marched out of the room, shoulders stiff. Hall stood and offered Tasha a curt nod. "We appreciate your cooperation, Agent Johnson." "Thank you." Tasha collected her belongings and left. Outside in the hallway, Mitchell was nowhere to be seen. She couldn't help but feel a twinge of empathy for the man, but that sympathy was overshadowed by the gravity of what he'd done. Her trust in local law enforcement had taken a blow, but she reminded herself that Mitchell did not represent all of APD. Her phone buzzed again. This time she read the message. Marcus had sent a location. Salazar had been tracked to a motel near the interstate. She hurried to her car, mind pivoting from the inquiry to the urgent matter of capturing their fugitive. As Tasha drove away from APD headquarters, her phone rang again, this time from Captain Laura Sinclair herself. She answered on speaker. "This is Agent Johnson." Sinclair's voice filled the car. "Agent Johnson, I want to personally apologize for Officer Dunn's behavior. That does not reflect our department's values." Tasha gripped the steering wheel. "I appreciate the sentiment, Captain." Sinclair hesitated, then continued, I just wanted to let you know we'll assist in any capacity to apprehend Salazar. We owe you that." "Thank you, Captain. We'll keep you updated," Tasha replied before ending the call. For a moment, she allowed a glimmer of optimism to surface. At least some corners of the APD recognized the wrong done and were willing to make amends. That was a step forward, albeit a small one. Meanwhile, Mitchell Dunn exited the building and trudged through the parking lot, each step heavier than the last. The hearing had gone worse than he imagined. His world, his career, his identity was on the brink. Yet instead of accepting responsibility, he clung to the notion that he'd been blindsided by a biased system. He vowed he would not go down quietly. Back at the FBI field office, Tasha joined Marcus, who was prepping a small tactical team. "We've confirmed Salazar is holed up in a cheap motel off I-85, he said, lacing his boots. "Locals have eyes on the room. We move in 15. Tasha nodded, adrenaline firing again. The fiasco with Dunn still fresh in her mind, she steeled herself for another potential confrontation. "Let's do it by the book," she told the team. No mistakes this time. They set off with lights off and sirens silent, weaving through traffic. With each passing mile, Tasha's focus sharpened. The fiasco with Mitchell was a bruise on her professional and personal pride, but she refused to let it define her. Her mission was clear: bring Salazar in, rescue any victims, and serve the cause of justice. No rogue cop, no personal vendetta would stand in her way. Outside the motel, twilight deepened, the sky tinged with purples and oranges. Tasha and her team assembled in the parking lot, rifles ready, bulletproof vests strapped on. Before they advanced, Tasha paused, exhaling a tense breath, hoping the night wouldn't devolve into the same chaos as before. They stormed Salazar's room, and in seconds it was over. Salazar tried to flee through a bathroom window, but an agent tackled him to the ground. Another suspect was handcuffed without incident. Best of all, 2 trafficked individuals were found in an adjacent room, frightened but alive. For Tasha, it was a moment of profound relief, a reminder of why she endured the ugliness of bigotry and the hazards of the job. She crouched beside one of the victims, offering reassurance, while her colleagues processed the scene. Yet, as she watched Salazar led away in cuffs, she couldn't help but recall how their initial sting had been sabotaged by Mitchell Dunn's rash actions. She silently prayed that the entire fiasco would end in a just resolution, that Dunn would face the consequences of his prejudice and let the department heal from this black mark. But in the back of her mind, Tasha knew that some men only learn the hard way, and that karma, once set in motion, rarely shows mercy. With Salazar in federal custody, Tasha felt a measure of triumph. The FBI's relentless work had paid off, ensuring the dismantling of a critical node in the trafficking network. Yet her personal battle against Mitchell Dunn loomed in the background, a tangled web of departmental politics and individual vendettas waiting to be resolved. Word of Salazar's capture spread quickly through law enforcement circles. The APD's Special Investigations Unit publicly praised the FBI's dedication. On social media, local activists lauded Tasha Johnson for her pivotal role in the mission. In stark contrast, Mitchell Dunn's reputation spiraled downward, each day bringing fresh rumors of pending criminal charges. Sitting in a cramped cubicle, Tasha pored over paperwork. Marcus approached with a folder in hand. "Thought you'd want to see this," he said, dropping it onto her desk. She opened it to find a stack of documents, phone records, dash cam footage logs, and statements from multiple APD officers. Marcus explained, "Internal Affairs has been pulling everything they can on Dunn. Word is they've uncovered a pattern of complaints, especially from black citizens." Tasha's brow furrowed as she skimmed the documents. Several known incidents jumped out: questionable stops in minority neighborhoods, a harassment claim by a black motorist, and an off-the-record scuffle with a Latino teenager in a parking lot. In each instance, Dunn had faced minimal consequences, thanks to either lack of hard evidence or superiors who looked the other way. "This is disturbing," Tasha murmured, feeling a pang of sorrow for the people who'd suffered under Dunn's authority. Why did it take so long for IA to take action? Marcus shrugged. You know how it goes. Sometimes it takes a big incident, like assaulting a federal agent, for all the skeletons to spill out of the closet. Despite her professional demeanor, Tasha also knew she was personally invested in seeing Dunn held accountable. It wasn't just about her humiliation or her injured shoulder. It was about what he represented, a corrosive prejudice that undermined the sacred responsibility law enforcement held. She resolved that she would not rest until justice was served. Far across town, Mitchell sat alone in his dingy apartment. The television was off, the curtains drawn. He nursed a whiskey, trying to drown the creeping sense of doom. His phone buzzed, and he saw the name of his father flash on the screen, an old-school cop who had once told him never to show weakness. Mitchell declined the call. He couldn't bear the shame or the lecture. He swirled the whiskey in his glass, mind racing with half-formed thoughts of revenge and self-pity. Perhaps he could skip town, find a job in private security somewhere that didn't dig too deep into his past. But then he remembered the mortgage, the bills, the life he'd built, such as it was. He didn't want to run, he wanted to fight, even if it meant going down swinging. He drained the last of the whiskey and slammed the empty glass on the table, the sound echoing in his silent apartment. The wheels of justice were turning against him, unstoppable, and he was trapped in a nightmare of his own making. If he couldn't find a way out, he risked losing everything. And so, while Tasha wrapped her day at the coffee shop, determined to keep pressing forward for the sake of justice, Mitchell Dunn stewed in the darkness, wrestling with the demons he had summoned. Day by day, the mountain of evidence grew, painting him as the villain. Whether he would atone or double down remained an open question, but fate was swiftly narrowing his options, and a reckoning was on the horizon that would leave no room for denial or escape. The district attorney's office didn't mince words. Within a week, they prepared charges against Mitchell Dunn for assaulting a federal agent and violating multiple department protocols. A swirl of media coverage gripped the city. On one hand, the successful takedown of Hector Salazar and his trafficking ring shone a positive light on law enforcement cooperation. On the other, the scandal of a rogue cop assaulting an FBI agent underscored deep-rooted issues that the city could no longer ignore. For Tasha, each day brought a fresh wave of interviews and paperwork. She found herself thrust into the spotlight, not just for her role in apprehending Salazar, but also as the face of the wrongdoing Dunn had committed. Requests for comment poured in from local news stations. She offered succinct, professional replies, carefully avoiding any insinuation that the entire APD was tarnished by Dunn's actions. Despite the pressure, she felt a sense of grim satisfaction. This time, accountability would not be swept under the rug. Dunn could no longer hide behind a badge or rely on old boy networks to shield him. On a crisp Monday morning, Tasha, along with her FBI colleagues, walked into Fulton County's Grand Courthouse. The marble floors gleamed, and an echo lingered in the cavernous halls. Today was the preliminary hearing to formally read the charges against Mitchell Dunn. Tasha wasn't required to testify yet, but she attended to show solidarity and to witness the proceeding firsthand. Dunn arrived, flanked by his union attorney. He wore a rumpled suit that couldn't quite mask his deteriorating confidence. His eyes flicked nervously around the courtroom, landing on Tasha for a brief, charged moment. In that instant, she glimpsed the raw fear beneath his bravado. She felt a pang of empathy, only to remember the humiliation and violence he inflicted upon her. Justice required fairness, not pity. The judge read the charges, and the DA's representative laid out the case: assault on a federal agent, obstruction of justice, and a pattern of misconduct that could lead to further civil rights violations. Dunn's lawyer pleaded not guilty, arguing that events were chaotic and that Dunn believed Tasha was a threat. The judge granted bail under strict conditions, including the surrender of Dunn's passport and a restraining order to keep him away from Tasha or any FBI facility. As Tasha left the courthouse, journalists peppered her with questions. She offered a measured statement. "We trust the judicial system to handle this matter with the seriousness it deserves. I'm focusing on my ongoing cases to keep our city safe." She then slipped into a waiting bureau vehicle, relieved to avoid further media frenzy. But the city wasn't done with Mitchell Dunn. The same day, an internal police board review concluded that he had violated departmental policies in multiple instances over the years. The board recommended immediate termination pending the outcome of the criminal case. Mitchell was effectively jobless, his reputation in tatters. He retreated to his apartment, blinds closed, phone off. He drank more than he ate, ignoring concerned voicemails from Brad Nelson and the union rep. Each day felt like an avalanche of consequences. He feared walking outside, worried about stares and whispers. The local news stations ran segments about him, discussing the broader issue of systemic racism in law enforcement. Mitchell turned the TV off in disgust, though a voice in the back of his mind insisted that some of those criticisms were valid. Then came the final blow. A federal civil rights investigation was launched, citing evidence that he had disproportionately targeted black drivers during his patrols. The potential for federal charges loomed. It was as if every sin he'd brushed aside for years came roaring back in unison. The trial of Mitchell Dunn took place 6 months later, in the same grand courthouse where Tasha had first seen him at the arraignment. By then, the city had largely moved on from the immediate scandal, but the courtroom buzzed with reporters, activists, and law enforcement officers curious to see the outcome. Tasha testified on the second day, recounting the night of the sting operation. She spoke confidently, detailing the events leading up to her wrongful arrest and emphasizing the blatant disregard Dunn showed for her credentials. The defense attorney tried to paint her as overreaching her authority, but the body cam audio swiftly undercut that narrative. There was no denying Dunn's aggression or the fact that he had zero jurisdiction to be at the warehouse. Coupled with the pattern of misconduct exposed by internal affairs, the case appeared ironclad. After a week of testimony, the jury deliberated for less than a day. They returned with a guilty verdict on multiple charges: assaulting a federal agent, obstruction of justice, and additional counts stemming from documented civil rights violations. The sentence was severe, several years in prison. It was an unprecedented outcome in the city's recent memory, sending a strong message that law enforcement officers abusing their power would not be shielded. Tasha felt a wave of relief wash over her when the verdict was read. Her posture stiffened as she watched Dunn's reaction. His face went pale, then flushed with anger. Once again their eyes met. In that final glance, she saw his fury melt into something resembling regret, though it might have been merely shock at the gravity of his sentence. She turned away, stepping out of the courtroom with her chin held high. Outside, reporters clamored for quotes. Tasha maintained her composure, offering a brief statement. "Justice was served today, and I hope this verdict fosters greater accountability in our institutions. My work continues, as does the work of many dedicated officers who respect the law and the people they serve." In the following weeks, the city of Atlanta grappled with the aftermath. Civic leaders and community advocates held town halls, discussing reforms aimed at preventing future misconduct. Training programs were revamped, body cameras made mandatory for all patrol officers, and an oversight committee was established to handle complaints with greater transparency. Within the APD, Captain Laura Sinclair took an active role in implementing new policies. She reached out to Tasha, inviting her to speak at a cross-agency seminar on best practices for interdepartmental coordination. Tasha hesitated at first, memories of the fiasco still raw, but eventually agreed. She believed the only way to heal and progress was to build bridges with those who truly wanted reform. On a bright afternoon, Tasha stepped onto a small stage in the APD's main auditorium. Around her sat rows of officers, including her friend Brad Nelson, who had parted ways with Mitchell's toxic influence. The energy in the room was a mix of curiosity and nervous anticipation. "Thank you for inviting me," Tasha began, her voice resonating through the space. "We all know that trust is the cornerstone of effective law enforcement. Trust between officers and the community, between local police and federal agencies, and among ourselves." She spoke about the successful joint stings that went well, highlighting the importance of shared intelligence and respect for each other's roles. Without directly naming Mitchell Dunn, she also addressed the necessity of rooting out bias. "We must never forget that our duty is to protect and serve, not to dominate or discriminate," she said, receiving solemn nods from several officers. As the session ended, a wave of applause sounded. Some officers approached to thank her for her candor. Captain Sinclair expressed her gratitude, adding that the department was committed to real change. Tasha felt a renewed sense of hope. Perhaps the fiasco with Dunn could serve as a catalyst for improvement, proving that even out of darkness, progress could emerge. And what of Mitchell Dunn? He was transferred to a federal penitentiary, stripped of the badge he had once wielded so arrogantly. Days in confinement stretched before him, a stark new reality where the uniform he once wore carried no weight. Sometimes he replayed his choices in his mind, moments he could have de-escalated, times he could have questioned his own biases. In the long hours of introspection, he recognized too late that his downfall was indeed of his own making. Whether he would ever truly repent was uncertain, but the consequences were inescapable. In the swirl of city life, the name Mitchell Dunn gradually faded from headlines, replaced by other stories, some hopeful, some tragic. Atlanta, like all great cities, marched onward. But for those directly involved, the lessons lingered. Tasha's name came up in conversations about integrity in law enforcement, an example of courage and professionalism under fire. Officer Brad Nelson quietly rose through the ranks, championing community policing initiatives, determined never to repeat the mistakes he witnessed in Dunn. Ultimately, the saga was a testament to Karma's relentless pursuit. Actions had consequences, and no one, not even those sworn to uphold the law, was immune. As Tasha continued her career, each day brought new battles, but she stood fortified by the knowledge that justice, though often slow, could be done when good people refused to stay silent. A year passed before Tasha realized she no longer thought about Mitchell Dunn every day. Life had resumed a rhythm, interspersed with new investigations, late nights poring over files, and the occasional moment of personal downtime. One such moment arrived on a balmy summer evening when she attended a small get-together hosted by Agent Marcus Whitfield. Marcus's apartment overlooked the glowing Atlanta skyline, the sunset painting the windows in soft hues of gold and pink. Tasha stood by the balcony, sipping a glass of lemonade, letting the conversation and laughter of colleagues wash over her. It was a rare chance to relax and simply be. As the night settled in, Marcus joined her on the balcony, handing her a plate of freshly grilled chicken. "You've earned a break," he teased. "I don't think I've seen you this chilled out in months." She smiled, realizing how tense her shoulders often felt. "Thanks. It's good to see everyone enjoying themselves." He nodded, taking a bite. "Ever think about how far we've come since that operation last year?" Tasha followed his gaze to the city lights. "I do. We took down Salazar. We cleaned house in some ways, maybe not enough, but it's a start." A breeze rustled her hair, and she felt the warmth of contentment settle in. Marcus hesitated before speaking again. "I've been meaning to tell you, Captain Sinclair told me that the new Oversight Committee has already resolved several complaints that would have been buried before." Tasha's eyes sparkled with a quiet pride. "Good. That means progress is happening." He studied her expression. "Do you ever regret pushing so hard against Dunn? Some folks might have just let it slide to avoid the headache." She shook her head firmly. "I don't regret it. It cost me some stress, sure. But if one less person faces abuse because of that, it's worth it." They fell into a comfortable silence, watching the cityscape, each lost in their thoughts. Tasha reflected on how the ordeal with Dunn had tested her professionally and personally. Yet it had also empowered her to stand up not just for herself, but for the values she believed in. Every time she saw small improvements in policies or heard about communities getting fairer treatment, it felt like a ripple effect from that one confrontation, an affirmation that the cost was worthwhile. Later in the evening, Tasha slipped out of the party a bit early, wanting to savor a quiet drive home. The city lights glimmered in the warm summer night, headlights weaving across highways like fireflies. She thought about the many people she had encountered, victims she had helped, families reunited, and even the officers who genuinely wanted to do right by their communities. Upon arriving at her apartment, Tasha kicked off her heels and sank onto the couch. The hum of the air conditioner and the soft glow of a lamp provided a cozy refuge. She scrolled through her phone notifications, a few social media messages from old classmates, a news alert about a community policing initiative expanding in the city, and an email from a local college asking if she'd be interested in guest lecturing about federal and local law enforcement cooperation. A small smile crossed her lips as she typed out a quick reply. "I'd be honored to speak. Let's arrange a date." She hit send, feeling a gentle surge of fulfillment. Life had a way of moving on, but it also offered opportunities to shape the future. Speaking at a college might inspire the next generation of officers and agents to uphold the principles she held dear. In the back of her mind, she allowed herself one fleeting thought about Mitchell Dunn, wondering if he had learned anything during his time behind bars. Part of her hoped he would emerge a changed man, one who understood that the badge was meant to serve, not oppress. But she couldn't dwell on it. She had bigger things to focus on now, continuing her work, sharing her experiences, and ensuring that the justice system she served genuinely protected all. In that moment, Tasha knew she would keep fighting in her own calm, resolute way. She would keep challenging prejudice wherever she found it, keep defending the vulnerable, and keep building alliances with those who sought truth and fairness. And so the night ended not with fanfare or fireworks, but with a quiet, profound certainty that some battles were worth every ounce of effort. After all, justice wasn't a destination, it was a path, and she was committed to walking it for as long as her feet could carry her. And there you have the powerful saga of a proud cop whose prejudice led to his ruin, and a resilient FBI agent who wouldn't bend, even under the weight of injustice. Officer Mitchell Dunn paid dearly for allowing hatred to eclipse his duty, while Special Agent Tasha Johnson emerged stronger, proving that standing up to wrongdoing within the very system sworn to protect us is not only possible, but essential. If this story resonated with you, if it sparked anger, hope, or a renewed sense of justice, take a moment to let us know. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more tales that delve into the heart of humanity's battles and triumphs. Together, by shining a light on these stories, we champion accountability, courage, and the enduring power of doing what's right.